Hello. Oh, I need to take this out, huh? We're not co working today. We're barely awake today. We're not working. Amazing. Hey, did you guys know that it takes a lot to get a stream set up and going and getting the camera angle you want and using the camera that you want? Like, did you know? Because I did not know. I mean, I knew, but I did. Amazing. So, this is going to be really interesting because I don't have a game situated for today. I don't have a game planned. I am really excited. It's on purpose, not on accident. I'm really excited to be able to talk about one of my most favorite things to talk about, which is therapy and Dungeons and Dragons. So, just a little bit of background while I get this set up and everything situated. Did not grow up playing D&D. Playing D&D was not a thing that I did as a kid or truly as an adult. I had, during COVID, during lockdown, I was, like all of us, having an existential crisis and questioning, generally existence and what I was doing. During COVID, I had 3 kids at home. One had just turned 2. No. Yes. No. They had just turned 1. One had just turned 1, so one 15 months old. One was in first grade online school, kindergarten online school, one in each. So I had my hands full, and like all of us, was terrified and freaked out. So my partner and I started watching Dimension 20. We started watching Dropout. I don't remember how I came across Dropout, probably TikTok. I was getting a lot of clips probably in my feed, and I was like, this is interesting. I just kind of want to check it out. And so when I checked it out, I was loving it. Okay, so watching Dropout, fell in love immediately. Absolutely loved it. The first season that I watched was Fantasy High. If you are not familiar with Dropout, Dropout is an online streaming platform. It has grown tremendously in the last 3 years. D20, Dimension 20, is their kind of flagship show ran by Brennan Lee Mulligan, where he runs a campaign for D&D. And if you're here, I'm assuming you know what D&D is. What are you doing? Outside? Outside. He runs a D&D table. The first campaign that he runs is called Fantasy High. And the way that he describes it is D&D meets John Hughes, like John Hughes movies, Breakfast Club. If you're not familiar, 16 Candles, kind of coming of age stories. Fantasy meets John Hughes. I was sold immediately. The way that Dimension 20 used a few storylines, actually, where they hit on grief, they hit on, what else did they hit on? Grief, religious deconstruction, toxic masculinity. It was the way that Brennan Lee Mulligan formed these stories and talked about these stories, and wove in challenges and encouragements and affirmations and reassurance into these characters through interactions with NPCs, through interactions with their parents, through interactions with, it was just incredible. So all of the characters, all of the players are teenagers, and each of them is dealing with their own unique situation. But they all go to high school together, are not friends, and then develop friendship along the season. So good. At the end of that season, there's an event that happens. I don't want to spoil it for anybody because to spoil that season would be truly awful. I was watching part 1 of the season finale on a plane on my way home from visiting a friend in Dallas, and I sobbed. Just straight was sobbing on a plane. I got a tattoo associated with that scene. After that, it was so deeply impactful for me that I thought there's got to be a way that you can use this in therapy. This is therapeutic. So there's got to be a way to use it in therapy. So and this is not, clearly a sponsored stream, but I went through Geek Therapeutics to get my Therapeutic Game Master designation certification, which is a program that therapists and mental health professionals can take to get this designation where you can run D&D tables therapeutically. So there's a way to craft NPCs to, if you're working on, if clients come to the table and they're wanting to work on social anxiety, you can have them interact with NPCs where they have to practice those social skills. So it's particularly awesome for neurodivergent folks. And I got into this way before I realized the overlap between, at the time I was doing queer community, religious trauma were my concentration specialties. And the queer community, religious trauma community, and neurodivergent community is almost a flat circle in my clinical experience and the clients that have found me. And so D&D was a perfect kind of enmeshment of all of those. Let me grab him real quick before he leaves the yard. This is always my favorite thing to do in session also. So having that background, it was so much fun to run. There are a couple of things that I want to talk about related to running Dungeons and Dragons within the therapy realm. I want to pull up a couple of resources. I'll be right back. I'm going to grab a couple of books and a couple of resources. Hold on one second. Okay, so here's the situation. So, like I said, I love talking about this, love all of the things about it. Okay, so I got a couple of resources. If you are a therapist looking, like exploring, or a therapist in training, exploring how you could use this, I'm going to give you a couple of resources. And then I want to talk to people who want to play, who have things that they want to work on, that they want to check out. Because it's really important to know it from both sides. As a player, I am currently playing in a campaign that is podcast-based, D&D for the Deconstructed, and I am loving it. And it's all people, it's not a therapeutic group, but we are working through therapeutic themes, deconstruction, identity formation, faith reconstruction. We're doing it through Curse of Strahd. So if you have any interest in checking that out, that's really good. I'll put that link in the description of this video, but D&D for the Deconstructed. So if you are a therapist or a therapist in training who is wanting to check this out, let me show you a couple things. So first of all is the Game Master's Dungeon Journal. This is specifically, when I went through the Therapeutic Game Master training for Geek Therapeutics, they take you through how to write clinical notes for each session, which is incredible. They also talk a lot about consent rules and the importance of session 0. There are a lot of resources that they give you based on that. And this journal helps you go through, like, okay, we're going to talk about group rules, right? As a therapist, you would already know this through training. Your group rules are rules that you have the collective group set at the beginning of any support group session, any session 1 of any gathering of a group, right? So group rules and safety rules, you have them make them together, and then using the X card for removing any triggering topics. So the X card within D&D, and I didn't know this before, but within D&D, the X card is a card that literally has an X on it, that at any time, if you're playing in real life or if you're playing like on Roll20, buddy, come here. Do you have a ball back there? Oh, you have a ball back there. Okay, hold on, let me get your ball. I really need to get him trained as a therapy dog so that I can just include him on everything that I do and get compensated for that, billable for insurance. So the X card is really important because you can digitally or in paper form throw it out, and it's immediately, whatever's being talked about is immediately nixed. There's an immediate stop to it. It's a great resource to have. House rules, how are problems addressed? So like, how are we going to talk through issues when we have problems with each other? How are we going to talk through when we have issues with the DM, the Dungeon Master, right? It should still be a therapeutic environment where clients can say, hey, I take issue with how this is going, and we got to talk about it. That should be completely fair game. So you want to have a clear outline before that. It also has grids, blank notes. Also has like world building sheets for, just like it normally would, right? Gossip, rumors, story plot, story beats, call to action, central conflict, major player goals. This is important if you are working. It's important so that you know who you're working with and what goal you're working towards. So if you're working toward social anxiety, you're working toward improved social interactions. Or if you're working toward alleviating depression and anxiety, you're putting them in situations that are similar to the real world anxieties that they may feel, but you're helping them work through that within this crafted world so that it helps them apply those solutions that they played out in game to real life. So the things that you experience in game can be directly translated to real life, hence why things like Dimension 20 make us just completely stop and break down. They also assume that you're working with the group 10 to 12 weeks, which is like the typical run of a typical group. So it has a weekly plan for you to kind of like suss out like, okay, how am I going to get from point A to point B? When I did therapeutic game master training, the most important thing that they taught us was, or that the game masters, because they had us play games, they would like do teaching or discussion for the first half. And then when we would meet in person, when we meet digitally online, we would do real life gameplay. So we played Call of Cthulhu. We did a real play through an RPG called Made, which is a really, really funny anime-based game that was really interesting. But the most important thing that they told us was know where you're starting and know where your group has to get to by the end of session. So that it doesn't matter how they get there. It doesn't matter kind of like what they throw at you. You can kind of make it up as you go as long as you have the end in mind. So these notes are nice to have so that as a clinician and as a facilitator, you can know where you're going from the beginning to the end. It has treasure planners for, specific characters, has player information. You can also mark attendance, which is really important when you're charting for or billing for insurance. You have to keep track of that as a therapist. I just really like that they have all of the things that you would include in a regular like DM planning journal, plus all of the clinical stuff. It's just really nice to have it all in one place, and that's made by Geek Therapeutics. Each week has a full session notes, check-in questions, story plan, major plot point, character goals, a flow chart of like where they started, what needs to happen, where they need to end, previous story recap notes, XP tracker, XP awards, XP losses. And they frame within the therapeutic context, XP losses are deductions due to unwanted behavior, which if you're working clinically can be important, and you can use those or not use those. That's a really, really helpful resource that I love. Have not written in it. If I decide to use it, make copies of it because I don't want to ruin it because I'm that kind of neurodivergent. Okay. One of the other really good resources for clinical or non-clinical gameplay is Roll and Play. I really, really enjoy this website, Roll and Play, because if you are neurodivergent running a campaign, there are a lot of decisions that go into creating a world, creating characters, creating NPCs, all of the things. This is really nice because it's literally a situation where you go to the table that you need. So here's a list of the tables, right? People and quests, world building, journey and events, combat and injuries, items and awards, and you just roll for them. So within this, they have meadow encounters, urban encounters, deep sea encounters, frozen encounters. Like there's just so many that was for journey and events. Names for taverns, character jobs as personality, like so many different things. So if you need something that's quick, or if you're trying to play with someone who's never played before, if you're trying to play with kids clinically or non-clinically, Roll and Play Press is an incredible website and resource. Let me see what other websites or what other resources they have on that website. Well, let's see. I'm never going to be able to figure out how to screen share. Let's check this out. Okay. So another thing for clinicians, if you are looking for resources about how to learn how to use D&D and gaming and geek culture in therapeutic practice, this book is incredible. Integrating Geek Culture into Therapeutic Practice, Clinician's Guide to Geek Therapy. This was written by the founder of Geek Therapeutics, Dr. Anthony Bean, along with Emery S. Daniel and Sarah Hayes. It's really interesting to have, like, from a clinical perspective, and I'm an information gatherer. So this is just like, this is both my hyperfixation and my career. It just is. Integration of play within video games and clinical practice. Let's see what else. Intro to Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop role-playing games and therapy. I would argue that you could even use something, my partner's really into Warhammer. You could use Warhammer as therapeutic clinical practice, like within the clinical practice room. It takes some maneuvering when you're trying to play like one-on-one, or if you needed to kind of mod it in order to play, you know, be the person DMing it. Yes, absolutely, Charlotte, I can. If you're the person DMing it, you could mod it so that it's a single player game, just using Warhammer. They're not called figurines. War structures and characters and all of those things, like troops. Let me see. Let me put this because I can't type and talk at the same time. Integrating geek culture into therapy practice. Okay, perfect. It's in there. Other resources and other, not platforms. I waited like 6 months to get this in the mail because it got lost. It's from an English author from England, and so I had to wait for it. But this is called Lichcraft. It's by Laurie O'Connell. I can also put it in the chat. This I have used before with trans clients because it is about playing your way. It says the year is 2069, setting is Great Britain. The Tories have been in power since 2010. Elections have been long abandoned. Due to National Health Service cuts, trans healthcare has been increasingly hard to access. The waiting list for a first appointment at a gender identity clinic is now 300 years. They don't want to outright refuse you or apply that the health service is over capacity or underfunded. Instead, they'll simply add you to the end of the list and wait for you to die. But they are fools, for you have learned the secrets of immortality, and you will get to the end of that waiting list, even if it means waiting for another millennium. So within Lichcraft, there are only 2 things that are non-negotiable aspects for each character. They are trans and they are on a waiting list. You get to choose if you are communist, anarchist, eco-socialist, socialist, or anti-imperialist. It is a really incredible playthrough to provide trans clients to empower them to feel as though to feel empowered and have agency and gain autonomy in a time when they otherwise may feel really out of control, and feeling out of control and feeling helpless and like they aren't able to clearly within the trans community. Not only are things really dangerous for a lot of trans and non-binary people right now within society, in the US and other places, but it can be a really lonely and isolating place. And so all of those things contribute to anxiety and depression. Lichcraft is one gaming system that can be played solo, can be run by a therapist and played by a client. You could also play it on your own, which I love these indie games that allow you to play solo because you're able to play whether or not you have someone running it for you. When Laurie O'Connell sends this game system to you, they also send these bookmarks that also have different characters on them. And you describe yourself like they're player sheets. So you have your politics, hobby, day job, magical source, spell, strength, sense, and then HP. So I'll put that in the comments as well. Also, fun fact, this was how I learned what a lich was, because I ordered it because I was looking for therapeutic modalities and gaming systems to use with trans and non-binary clients, and this came up. Did not know what a lich was. Had to ask my partner what a lich was. And he was like, oh, that's clever. When I told him like the title of it and what the gameplay was. And I said, why? And he said, well, because liches never die. Like liches. And I was like, oh, can you tell me more about liches? Because he's played D&D since he was very young and has always been into fantasy. I understand fantasy cognitively, but I was not a fantasy reader. Very much a murder mystery kind of kid. Charlotte, yeah, this is a really cool game system, and it's I'm a sucker for art. So like the artwork within this book is incredible. Like I just clear a picture of it. It's beautiful. And I really enjoy buying from like even just what they do with the with the fonts and stuff. Like I just love buying from independent authors and artists because they don't have to play by the rules and they just get to make it up as they go. I love looking at their tables that they decide. I love being able to put together a game like that and like putting together like the sequencing of events and the consequences. Or the reason I think that a lot of millennials are drawn to D&D right now, the New York Times or Washington Post did an article in D&D in 2022 that got a lot of attention and was like, D&D is making a comeback. And I was like, this is choose your own adventure. This is choose your own adventure. I'm a straight millennial. I'm a mid-millennial. I was born in 1987. So being raised in the 90s, I loved choose your own adventure books of any kind. And they were rampant during my childhood. That's what D&D is. That's all that D&D is. So it's nice to, especially as an adult, the reason that I go to D&D, I was really nervous to play it at first because I'm not good at improv or making my own decisions. Making my own decisions split second. That's not my strength. And so having a situation where like, that's exactly what you have to do was a nice change and a nice kind of like persona to put on or to try. And part of gameplay, right? Part of tabletop role-playing games, even board games to a certain extent, I notice with my kids, you get to be someone else. You get to try something on. And so for people who either grew up with religious trauma, there's a lot of identity suppression that happens there. A lot of typically enmeshment with either like within high control groups with the leader or with your parents. And so when you start to do that process of, in therapy, we call it differentiating, when you start to pull apart from those identities that you were told you had to hold, trying to develop your own identity is really disorienting and really upsetting, and is typically why, like, how I get a lot of clients into my practice is that they're starting that process and they're like, I'm having panic attacks. I've never had panic attacks before. And we discovered that they're differentiating and they're trying to establish their own identity. TTRPGs allow you to put on not masks, but try on different costumes, right? They allow you to try saying certain, different things that you may not say in real life that could translate into something in your real life that felt really empowering in game. So you feel like, no, I can do that out of game, right? And it sounds really not elementary, but it can sound like, to some adults, it can sound really infantile to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to play a game and then apply it in my real life. But because we all have also suffered, at the very base, all of us have suffered this collective trauma of the pandemic. And that's, clearly people who come from other marginalized communities have traumas that the pandemic built on top of. This is a very easy way to access parts of ourselves that might be difficult to access otherwise. It makes it a lot more comfortable, a lot less threatening than, hey, I'm going to deconstruct and then reconstruct my entire identity in a very clinical setting where I have to use insurance and I have to disclose all of my trauma up front, right? Like this, you can do almost. TTRPGs and role-playing games allow you to do it by proxy, which gives a client a little bit of a buffer. And as a client, right, I don't have to disclose anything that I don't want to, right? I can show up to what I want to show up to. It's the same kind of mechanism and processing that we do when we read books that make us cry, right? Or we read books that are like, oh, that hit me so deeply. Why did it hit me so deeply? Well, it's because there's something tied to your life that you tied to this book, that you saw a mirror reflecting back to you. So I just love that, Charlotte. Yeah. It's really nice to be able to trying out, hey, how is this going to go, right? To explore being more mask presenting within D&D. Yeah, nobody has to know what you're doing. It provides like a really comfortable amount of anonymity that's like, I'm just going to try this. I would be really interested too to know if like you gauged the reaction of other people, like, right? Like of your friends, to see like, how would this go? Like, how are they going to react to this, right? Or how do they react to this person? And not knowing, like knowing but not knowing. This is a version of yourself that they don't know is a version of yourself, right? It provides that safety, right? Which within the trans and non-binary community and the queer community, that safety is like of the utmost importance. So for a lot of clients, if they come to me and they're like, I'm trying to find community, I'm trying to find, a place that I belong, especially if they are queer, I'll say, do you have a board game store near you? I know this is going to sound really weird, but do you have a board game store by you? And typically, it's not unusual for them to. If they don't, I'll say, okay, cool. I'm going to throw a couple of Discord servers at you. And let's check out and see if they have like a D&D group where you can hop in. Yes, the entire premise is that everybody's creating a character and makes it a very safe container, because it's like, no, this is what everyone's doing, right? This is how everybody's presenting, and this is what we're all doing. I'm not doing anything different than the person next to me. And I really like I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Like going into playing through D&D for the Deconstructed, playing through Curse of Strahd, I knew one of the people that I'm playing with. I only knew one, and I knew her through Geek Therapeutics, kind of, oh my gosh, peripherally. Like we knew each other online. We had done a couple of things together, but we didn't know each other that well. The community that you build within tabletop role-playing games and D&D in particular, through those characters, right? It's so interesting because those characters are a shadow of you in some way, right? Even if it's only that you made that character, they're shadows of each of you. And so the different ways that I have built relationships with these people, because we're playing digitally or virtually. I live in California. They all live on the East Coast. So we are multiple time zones apart. The community that I've built with them means a lot to me, because I know that the vulnerability and the space that they hold within that community is really specific and important, right? So it can really help cultivate vulnerability, cultivate practicing vulnerability, cultivating, hey, like even after session, there should always be a debrief, right? Clinically or not, there should always be a debrief of a session afterwards. Hey, how's everybody feeling? Our DM for D&D for the Deconstructed works through off mic. How's everybody feeling? That was kind of a twist that was thrown in there at the end. How's everybody doing? Really good to check in. You get that space to like debrief and either decide, yeah, hey, I'm going to process it here and I'm going to be vulnerable, or I'm not going to process it here. Yeah, really cool getting to know people through their characters. It's, doing creative work, it gives you a different, almost like a more vulnerable view of people, because creativity, I feel like especially for the neurodivergent community, people tend to put a little bit more of their vulnerabilities out on display than you would normally get in a one-on-one conversation. Neurodivergent folks communicate in a lot of ways. Like it's it is a misnomer that neurodivergent people are bad at communication, right? Or they're bad at social interaction. Through a neurotypical lens, we're bad at both of those things. But I, as a neurodivergent person, am hyper aware of how people are feeling. So I can feel even virtually, and this is why virtual therapy has not, like providing telehealth has not been an issue for me. I will let clients know, hey, I noticed something changed. I'll feel their countenance drop by a degree, and I'll notice it, and I'll say, hey, I noticed something dropped with you or something changed. If I'm off, that's totally fine. Forget I said anything. Let's move forward. But most of the time I've noticed something. So when you get neurodivergent folks together and they're able to notice those subtleties, that's why from the outside to a neurotypical person, it can look like we're trauma dumping or we're info dumping or we're oversharing. Yes, 100%, Charlotte. That would be that's an incredible role to have within that space because of the attention to detail, right? Like that's incredible. Being able to notice those things is a skill that not everybody has, which I didn't know, like especially growing up. So within the therapeutic realm, being able to go, something's a little bit off. Can we talk about it? right? In D&D, you can notice that, work it into gameplay, and work through it in a safe way, where it's almost, because there are a lot of neurodivergent people who, including myself, who deal with hyper empathy, and this is not like, oh, I'm special, I'm like I'm highly sensitive, I'm very special. The hyper empathy is almost close to, like, I have to protect myself so I don't secondarily traumatize myself through things I see on social media or stories I hear from other people. So with that, the D&D tabletop role-playing games provide almost like a safety suit for me to have a distance between me and other people that make that hypersensitivity not so hyper, right? It gives me a safe buffer that is still vulnerability without me completely exposing all of my nerves and putting myself at risk. And I feel like that's true for a lot of hypersensitive, hyper-empathetic, neurodivergent people. Definitely. I'm going to pull up a list of Dimension 20 seasons. I was trying to look through and see if I could use... Oh, thanks, Charlotte. No, I'm really happy to talk about anything related to therapy and D&D, or therapy and processing. I just think that there's a lot of opportunity for media, for different mixed media to be used in therapy that's missed. And I don't know if it's missed because it's neurodivergent, or like the ways that neurodivergent people, like I find myself saying a lot in session, what you're talking about reminds me of this one moment in this movie, thus and such. And they'll go, yeah, that's exactly it, or whatever. Or like, oh, it reminds me of this one TV show, right? When you pull in different, I feel like storytelling is a way that neurodivergent folks can relate to what's going on in a unique way. Okay, Dimension 20 seasons. I want to go through them and talk about which ones you can go to for specific topics, what the themes through the seasons through those campaigns that I have gained, that I've been like, oh, I will recommend them to clients. Excuse me. So dry in California today. Okay. First of all, what you need to know about Dimension 20, if you've never watched this before, is they are very cognizant and inclusive. They're very cognizant of pronouns for players and for characters. They're very cognizant and mindful of inclusion and diversity. And it's why I chose to watch them, this might be controversial, over Critical Role when I first started watching live play. Yes, absolutely. Charlotte, I think that that's the unique component that neurodivergent clinicians bring into the therapy space, right? That it's kind of like, people will ask, well, do you use, what have they asked me? People will ask me, like, what's a typical therapy session? And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that. My humanity very much shows up in my clinical practice, which includes letting my dog out, includes, for my neurodivergent, I have tried to build my practice. It's taken me about a year. I've tried to build my practice where it's supportive for my neurodivergent brain and heart and body, which means I've had to do hard things like draw my caseload down. I've had to let go of clients who needed more care and more attention than I could provide because of my ADHD and autistic capacity. I just didn't have it. And it's a lot of trial and error, but it's in that creative arts, like within therapy, that's going to be part of it. And I feel like we're just on the cusp of like paying attention to that stuff. Yes, making social change the way you want to, I feel like is especially pertinent. And this is like no hate to marriage and family therapists or LPCCs, like licensed professional counselors. Everybody who works in mental health is incredible. And I feel like social workers, which is what I am. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in California. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in social work. I feel like a lot of the not nonlinear thinkers, but the non-conventional thinkers end up in social work because we want to enact social change. And I think that's how we find things like tabletop role playing. Or I had a mentor, she's been a mentor to me for like almost 12 years. Shout out to Jill Jones. She's incredible. If you need a therapist in Georgia, go find her. But she, at one point, we were talking about a client, and I said, it's really difficult for this client to make doctor's appointments. This was like 3 years ago. And she said, why don't you have them pull their phone out and make the phone call in session? And I was like, can we do that? And she was like, why not? That's like a clinical intervention. They need the time. They don't have the time. You have the time. And they've set aside this time with you. Have them call the doctor right then. Or ask them if they want to, right? Consent is important. That kind of non-conventional thinking, that was not something that I was taught I could do in individual therapy. I actually was not. My 3,200 clinical hours that I had to gather for practicum were actually where I learned most of my individual therapy skills. Yes. Yeah. I love that you asked your therapist if they would watch it, because I think that is also something that is okay to ask your therapist to do, right? Like, that's not like, hey, this was really impactful for me. Could you watch it or could you read it, right? I think that an engaged therapist will do exactly that. And a good therapist, can you see him booping his nose? Also, he's named after Job from Arrested Development. So I kind of just like worked myself into this. Do you need to go potty? He will stand here and boop that handle to let me know he needs to go potty. Okay. Go. And then other times he just wants the door open so he can see it. Oh, Charlotte, I love that your therapist just offered. That's amazing. Oh, I love that so much that you didn't even have to ask. Okay. With these 10 minutes left, I want to go through and talk about the D20 seasons. But please continue to ask questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. Okay, so Dimension 20, you're just going to lay outside the door? Okay. Fantasy High is a really good, Fantasy High Season 1 is a really good one to watch if you're trying to work through religious deconstruction, issues of faith, queerness, like coming out or questioning, like exploring queerness. I'm trying to think of what else in Fantasy High. Toxic masculinity is a theme that they hit on there. Mental health, newly diagnosed mental health, or like undiagnosed mental health. Like you think you might have some anxiety or depression. That's a really good one, really safe one to go through. Unsleeping City has a lot of good themes around capitalism, anti-capitalism. One of the main characters for that season, like the MCs, is trans. And so that one is really good. One of the actors within the main group, so like there's a main group that runs gameplay through Dimension 20. They're called like the main seasons, the main cast. And then there are side quests while they're filming like main quests. The main cast, Allie Beardsley, they address it a little bit in terms of their voice changing over seasons, or I feel like in, what was the horror season that they did? What is the horror season called, Charlotte? Never After. In Never After, their voice cracks a lot. And so they make fun of themselves and the cast gives them a hard time. But you get to watch their transition and their journey. So if you are trans or non-binary, that could be an incredible thing to watch. Normalize existing. God forbid, right? Court of Fey and Flowers is really good for people who are queer, people who are really into Bridgerton. I watched the first season of Bridgerton and then was done. I don't even know that I finished it. But if that's your jam, Court of Fey and Flowers is incredible. My sister really enjoyed that season. Crown of Candy explores, oh my God, what doesn't this season explore? Crown of Candy is, Brennan described it as Candyland meets Game of Thrones, and that's exactly what it is. It is a very intense season. If you do not have the emotional space or if you are hypersensitive, I would say go through it slowly. But that one works through chosen family, family dynamics. If you have kind of like intense family dynamics, enmeshment, and you are building your own identity, that's a really good season to go through. Starstark Odyssey is just fun chaos. That's super fun chaos. That one is based on a comic that Brennan's mom wrote. That one's just silly funny. That one's like my comfort watch. That one's the one I watch just like when I'm sick or when I'm feeling especially low. That's the season I watch. Allie Beardsley is my favorite actor in any of the seasons, so that one features them quite heavily, and so I really enjoy that season. Let's see, for main cast. Let's keep on with the main cast. These are all extras, side quests, so let me go through. I'm looking at a list that has a bunch of them. Let's look at the aired order. I shouldn't go to the Wikipedia. Okay. Okay. Intrepid Heroes is what they call the main group. Starstruck Odyssey. Never After. Okay, Never After was really good because while it was a horror season, it wasn't terrifying. It wasn't like I'm not a horror person and I really enjoyed it. That one explores grief to an extent. Crown of Candy also explores grief. Never After made me cry multiple times. It also explores relationship dynamics where I'm trying to think. Relationships where you like almost miss the mark, where like relationships are hard, if relationships are difficult or confusing, like interactions. This is a really good season to watch. It's also very silly. But yeah, that one's a really good season. Two of the offshoots that I also want to point out, Dungeons and Drag Queens is really good if you've never played D&D, because that one, they also filmed in a way. First of all, they filmed it with stars of RuPaul's Drag Race. So it was Alaska, Thunderfuck, Bee, and Monet Exchange. Some have played, like Bob the Drag Queen has played a lot. Monet has played a little bit, but Jujubee and Alaska have not played at all. It's a really good season to watch if you have no context, do not know how to play, because Brennan is so soft with them and walks them through what they don't know. So it's filmed in such a way that like if you haven't ever played before, because they knew that it was kind of like bringing a lot of drag queen fans, drag race fans, and drag queen fans into D&D, they needed to be able to marry those two seamlessly. So it's filmed in a way that walks you through it. Mentopolis was great if you want to know more about how our brains process like neuroscience, if you want to understand impulses, the fight, flight, freeze response, how our brains interact with other parts of our brains. It's an homage to like film noir and like kind of the old-timey detective shows. So it's filmed in it's the first time they use the new dome, I think, with the effects that are video affected into the dome. So that's really cool. Hank Green is also in that season, which was really, really fun to watch because infamously he has, when drunk, tweeted about how hot Brennan Lee Mulligan is, which no fight for me. I just love that Hank Green is bi because then he later came out as bi. That season, he also uses the Kids on Bikes system. Kids on Bikes is a great system to use. It's similar to like Stranger Things themed, but the system, like that story play is for Kids on Bikes. The system runs really, really easily and pretty quickly. So it keeps the game going and you don't have to keep track of a lot of numbers. I am not finished with Burrow's End. That's another offshoot that has occurred, it just finished last week. I did not think I was going to like it, and I like it a lot more than I do. Watching Brennan as a player play a mother is just the most heartwarming thing I've ever seen. And received the compliment of my life from my partner when he said, Brennan's playing you this season. Oh my gosh, Charlotte, that's so cool. I had no idea. That's amazing. I don't know how I didn't know they were originally from Orlando. That's super cool. Yeah, and then upcoming in January, Dimension 20 is going to be running Fantasy High Junior Year. So if you're not caught up, or if you're like, I might check it out, watch it now because you want to go through junior, or you want to go through freshman year, which is season 1. Season 2 is sophomore year. That one's a little hard for me to get through because they did it live and the sound is all kinds of fucked. But try. And then junior year, we'll be filming, be airing in January. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and listening to me talk about therapy and D&D. Truly one of my most favorite things to touch on and talk about. If you guys have any questions, please feel free. You can DM me. I'm on TikTok, Instagram. What else am I on here? At It's Crystal Britt. You can go to my website, crystalbritt.com. Yeah, for all of your therapy or non-therapy questions. If you're watching this, I can't be your therapist, but that's okay. I can still point you in the direction of a therapist who has my vibes, is what I like to tell people, that I trust and also has my vibes. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to be back tomorrow morning for a co-working stream. I have to keep these to about an hour just because of the way my day is structured, but especially because of the way this week is structured. Shout out to all of the parents who are helping keep their household together when they have kids in school. I have spirit days every single day this week. I got to help get my kids ready for. So wish me luck. Yeah. If you guys have any questions, just shoot them to me. Thanks for being here.